When we think of the stereotypical ruin of pop culture, it is typically distinguished by three key features. It is hidden, it is defended by traps, and it contains valuable treasure. In combination, these make for awesome adventure settings as depicted in movies, TV shows, video games, RPGs, and more. But do these sorts of locations actually exist in history? Well, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Let's find out. When I'm not making history documentaries, I try to stay up to date on the events of our world today. Unfortunately, this often devolves into aimless browsing on social media. Thankfully, our sponsor Morning Brew has a solution. Morning Brew is a free, daily newsletter that gets delivered to you every day of the week. Their content is customized to your areas of interest and presents you with relevant, informative, and witty content. Through their service, I've been able to stay informed on the latest when it comes to business, finance, tech, and international news. It's 5 minutes of content delivered in a far more enjoyable way than the dry, dense, and boring format of traditional news. As an example, in a single newsletter, I was able to follow along with the release of the latest US inflation figures, the resulting fallout in the markets, whilst also staying in the loop regarding the ascension of King Charles III. Morning Brew has been a great addition to my routine while rolling out of bed, drinking my coffee, or walking the dog. It's free and takes just 15 seconds to sign up, so there is no reason not to subscribe to Morning Brew if you're interested in business, finance, or tech by going to morningbrewdaily.com/Invicta or by clicking the link in the description. Enjoy! We can begin with the topic of hiddenness. This one is the easiest to confirm, and for good reason. Simply put, there might be any number of reasons that people would seek to hide a site. And even if they had no intent to do so, the passing of time might just as readily obscure its location. So what are some examples of these so-called hidden sites? Well, one of the most famous cases of intentional obfuscation involves the tomb of Attila the Hun. Legend says that the king was laid to rest in a triple coffin made of gold, silver, and iron, along with the spoils of his conquests. According to the 6th century author Jordanes, quote, "Then in the secrecy of night, they buried his body in the earth, and so that great riches might be kept from human curiosity, they slew those appointed to the work, a dreadful pay for their labor, and thus sudden death was the lot of those who buried him, as well as of him who was buried." This story actually appears to have been an ancient trope of sorts, as variants can be found attributed to the burial of other so-called barbarian leaders of this period. The Gothic king Alaric, for instance, was said to have had his tomb hidden by the divergence of a river, with the laborers also being killed in the aftermath. Perhaps this concept was inspired by the steppe practice of burying their great figures in nondescript mounds in the vast open steppe. But in pop culture, such hidden places are not just simple coffins hidden under a thin layer of dirt. Rather, they are large complexes which extend underground. Historically speaking, many tombs do indeed have multiple chambers and passages in them, especially in regions where society is built into the rock. But even still, these are rarely sprawling networks worthy of a dungeon dive. Some examples include the ancient myth of the labyrinth, which some believe was inspired by the extensive passages of Knossos. One might also think of the various Egyptian tombs which sprawl out beneath the pyramids or the Valley of Kings. Perhaps the closest one might get to our expectations would be one of the various so-called underground cities, such as Kaymakli in Turkey, which features many levels of storage, habitation, and ventilation. In the medieval period, I could also highlight any number of subterranean tombs and fortress complexes. One archaeological feature worth mentioning, though, are the so-called Erdstall tunnels, which can be found under towns and farms across Europe. These have hidden entrances which give way to multi-level passages interconnected by shafts and slipways. Much folklore exists about the dwarves who built them or the monsters which inhabit them. However, their true purpose is unclear. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that they were large enough to be used as any form of secret base or long-term refuge. Those functions were more commonly fulfilled by old mines or cave systems. The famous catacombs beneath Paris, for instance, were once stone mines, while the lair of the infamous 16th century bandit serial killer Crispin Gunnerbertinga was supposedly a heavily retrofitted cave. But what about other locations beyond Europe? Well, many examples exist across the world, but for now I'd like to focus on the trope of pirate and New World themed secret locations. With regards to the former, one of the most famous sites is the mysterious Oak Island, where Captain Kidd and others are said to have buried their treasure. Notable areas of interest include the 100-foot deep Money Pit, which reportedly featured descending platforms, Smith's Cove, where wooden structures and non-native coconut fibers have been found, as well as the peculiar formation of Nolan's Cross and a triangle-shaped swamp. As for sites of Central and Southern America, these are iconic for many reasons. The most obvious being that ruins overtaken by the jungle make for incredible settings. Even better, the fact that often entire cities have been lost in this way means that they are far more mysterious and expansive than their old world counterparts. From the age of exploration up until this very day, people continue to seek out these sites. Even the likes of Machu Picchu was not discovered by outsiders until the late 19th century. Yet again, I would add the caveat that while various ruins may be large on the outside, interiors, and especially underground complexes, are always quite small. Now that we've covered this first key topic of our video, let's turn to the second one, the traps. The first thing that comes to mind are the iconic scenes from Indiana Jones, where he has to navigate a devilish array of spikes, blades, arrow shooters, and more. These features are echoed across various forms of media and feature prominently in the dungeon diving of RPGs. If one were to catalog all of these, they would represent a formidable selection of options with which to protect an important site. But while they are certainly effective in theory, common sense tells us that they would be entirely impractical to implement, especially as any sort of long-term deterrent that might hope to stand the test of time. And yet, there is some historical precedent here. We can start with the famous boulder trap from Indiana Jones, a simple yet deadly mechanism. It was apparently inspired by the 1954 comic book story Scrooge McDuck in the Seven Cities of Cibola, which in turn can trace its roots back to centuries of tales regarding the legendary Spanish exploration of the New World. From these, it's hard to discern where exactly the specific boulder trap idea came from. Perhaps someone simply made it up, or was inspired by reports of a natural rock slide, a cave-in, or some other dangerous event which struck a group of adventurers. Interestingly enough, the closest I could get to a real-life boulder trap would be cases where it was the explorers themselves who did the booby trapping. The best example of this are reports of the so-called Spanish death traps. Apparently, over the course of the decades spent mining the Americas for precious metals, it became fairly common for miners to guard the troves of minerals they had spent years accumulating before they were ready for processing and transport. They therefore took great care to hide mine entrances and booby trap tunnels to dissuade trespassers. Some sources claim that the government even ordered such traps to be installed in cases where a rich mine had to be abandoned before it was fully drained. Legend goes that miners would leave behind secret symbols warning fellow Spaniards of the dangers. Beyond this, the documented evidence for such booby traps is rather hard to come by. One exception, however, are the Egyptian tombs, which did indeed feature a series of anti-looter measures. These included portcullis barricades, false doors, and hidden chambers, in addition to deep pits, though the last of these may have had ulterior purposes. Another interesting case is the mausoleum of the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. While it is primarily known for the terracotta army found inside, ancient historians write of how it also boasted potentially hazardous features such as crossbows rigged to shoot and rivers of toxic mercury. While these may seem like fanciful exaggerations by non-contemporary writers, they are lent some credence by the work of researchers who have, for instance, detected abnormally high levels of mercury in the soil above the tomb. But just because we have little actual evidence of elaborate mechanisms in such places doesn't mean that they were thought to be undefended by people of the past. Ancient sources from across the eras mention all kinds of protective hurdles meant to stop would-be dungeon delvers. Admittedly, most of the time, these are supernatural in nature. For instance, it's a quite common cultural belief that disturbing the dead will draw the ire of vengeful spirits or gods. Many plagues from Greek and Roman history are said to have been unleashed by the desecration of tombs and temples. The Byzantine historian Xenarus recounts the perils which faced one such ancient thief. Apparently, King Herod had heard that the tomb of David held vast wealth which his predecessor had tapped into. Hoping to do the same, he secretly entered the complex with a few conspirators. Driven by greed, they were not satisfied by the trinkets found at the entrance and delved into the inner sanctum. Here, the henchmen attempted to pry open the sarcophagus, but as they did so, flames spouted forth, burning them alive and sending King Herod running. More fascinating examples can be found in Norse mythology. Their sagas are rife with the motif of heroes seeking out the entombed weapons of other, long-dead heroes. In doing so, they often have to overcome some challenges, such as a draugr or even the original hero, before claiming the prize. Similar types of stories can be found scattered across the historical record. Now, having thus covered both the secrets and the traps which guarded ancient sites, we can finally turn our attention to the final iconic feature of such tropes, their treasures. Often, in pop culture, the deepest holds of a ruin are brimming with loot. Historically speaking, there is certainly precedent for this. Tombs, especially of important figures, are often accompanied with valuable grave goods. The Egyptians are most famous for this practice, but many other cultures also left their dead with items meant for the afterlife. Temples and various important sites might similarly be filled to the brim with loot. All of these were potential targets for robbers and marauding forces who would pick such places clean given the chance. Thus, very few ruins today exist with their contents intact. The Tomb of Tutankhamun was one notable exception, which yielded an astounding haul in modern times. But even if treasures lay undisturbed until today, the passing of time would have eaten away at all but the best preserved materials. Yet even if most ruins today don't yield the traps and treasures of our imagination, there are nonetheless more mundane dangers which guard the scraps of the past which can prove just as invaluable to researchers. It is for this reason that archaeology is a far more slow and deliberate trade than something out of Indiana Jones. Locations have to be carefully explored, meticulously documented, and carefully analyzed for years to squeeze out morsels of information. But even without the glitz and the glam, the discoveries made in this way are perhaps more exciting than what we see in film and form the bedrock of much of the history we share on the channel. For now, this is where we will end our episode. I hope that you found this exploration of the truth behind pop culture ruins to be enlightening and entertaining. Definitely let me know if there are any additional examples from history you think we've missed in our coverage. A huge thanks to the patrons for sponsoring this episode, and a big shout out to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this video possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.